Well, this is actually where Paul's been heading all along. And despite the long road getting to this section, lots of theological terrain to cover. Nevertheless, this is where he wants to be. Would someone like to open us in prayer tonight?
Sure. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this another opportunity to help us as pilgrims and aliens and strangers in this world. Do not take these opportunities for granted. Help us to cherish them and make the best use of them. Be with Geoff as he opens Galatians again, and may we all grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord through his teaching.
All right. So let's walk through the handout. You'll see I'm repeating myself, but this kind of bookend connection between Galatians 1:4 and Galatians 6:14 through 15 is so important for the message within Galatians. And today I actually counted the words. Next week I may count the letters, because it's so interesting how close they came out. Roughly 40 Greek words into the epistle, Paul writes what we call Galatians 1:4, that the Lord Jesus Christ gave himself for our sins to deliver us from the present evil age. Okay, so that is, from Paul's perspective, something that's been accomplished. It's not to be accomplished. It is for us in the past tense. Then, after he writes these verses, what we call Galatians 6:14 through 15, but far be it from me to boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the world has been crucified to me and I to the world. Okay, so this is something beyond sort of how we imagine personal salvation. This strikes us as a definitive break from creation and its fallenness. And this idea will show up in our passage tonight. So under these new circumstances, neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creation. Following those words, Paul uses 47 more Greek words, with the word amen being the last word in the epistle. So right near the front and at the end, does this mean anything? And I think it does. I think it means what I suggested back in September, that Paul intentionally opens and closes Galatians with explicit references to the believer's new life in the age to come, which then, these two references provide bookends to the letter as a whole. So the age to come's presence in the world, now as we've seen, mediated by the eschatological spirit. In the eschatological spirit handout, there's still one left, if you want to take it, who unites God's people to the risen and glorified Lord, who is the Messiah, Jesus, and we know from any number of references that he is dwelling in heavenly glory. So this literary convention, I'm calling it bookends, I didn't make that up, but it's pretty obvious what that means, is itself part of the larger argument which puts the nomos in its, it should be right place, I need to proofread, in the present evil age, the age of fallenness and the flesh. The nomos served God's purpose by preserving in the world Abraham's seed, Israel, in order to preserve an unbroken lineage for Abraham's seed, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, that's not the only thing that the nomos did. There's much else involved in that. But for the argument in Galatians, this is front and center. So the Jesus who gave himself for our sins to deliver us from the present evil age is the Jesus who loved and saved Paul by bringing about Paul's death to the nomos, which I think happens in this crucifixion, right? The world has been crucified to me and I to the world. So through nomos, to nomos I died so that I might live. I might live to God. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me, and the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And I don't like to automatically jump out of the book we're in, but the parallels to Romans 7, 4 through 6 are striking, especially in light of the fruit bearing that we're about to consider. So you may remember this passage in Romans 7 where Paul talks about marriage and death and how death ends the marriage. He says, "Likewise, my brothers, you also have died to the law, to the nomos, through the body of Christ," presumably the crucified body of Christ, "so that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that, to the end that, so that we had to undergo this death and resurrection." For Jews, that meant very precisely breaking from the Sinai covenant and its administration in order to do the thing that God intended from the outset, which is bear fruit for God. So this is a real twist, right? Bearing fruit for God requires death and resurrection, just as it does in Galatians. "For while we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions aroused by the nomos," right? Here's what the law in part brought about in Israel. Far from tamping down sin, it actually was a source of stirring up. It was provocative. It drew people to sin. When that was going on, when our sinful passions were aroused, they were at work in our members to bear fruit, but to bear fruit for death, not for life. But now we are released from the nomos, from that covenant administration, having died to that which held us captive. Sounds just like Galatians 2, 20 and 21. So that we serve as slaves in the newness of the Spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. So there's a kind of a commentary there on what Paul writes personally. I don't think when Paul says, that he's been crucified with Christ, he means just me, but me representatively of those who once belonged to Israel according to the flesh and now are people of the Spirit. So this is kind of a big picture thing. Then in 3, 1 through 5, that kind of turning point, we see now actually that Paul left a T uncrossed and an I undotted. And this idea came to me from Gordon Fee. Paul says, "Let me ask you only this, did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by hearing with faith? Are you so foolish? Having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh?" Right? And that's not some internal conflict between the spiritual part of us and the fleshly part of us, so that we're manifesting self-effort to achieve God's favor. It's that up there. It's eschatological. "Having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh?" now he is ready to speak to what beginning by the Spirit and what being perfected by the Spirit looks like. So in other words, in that Galatians passage, 3:5, it's you began with the Spirit and now you're reverting to the flesh to bring about completion. That is, you're becoming Torah observant under a covenant. But this leaves hanging the idea that what was intended all along was beginning by the Spirit and then being perfected by the Spirit as well. A continuous line, right? So now that spiritual trajectory that began when they became united to Christ is brought to completion, particularly beginning in verse 22 of chapter 5. The Spirit, in order to bear fruit for God, in order to be a people who are alive to God and dead to sin, a people who belong to another, to Christ, who gave himself for us. This is the goal of his redemptive work. To produce fruit. And it's the Spirit who does the producing. Okay, so that's, once again, kind of a big picture thing. And I'll just stop there to see how we're doing with that.
What's the T-N crossed and I and O?
Oh, you know how you're supposed to cross your T's and...
I know,
Oh.
but what are you, I'm not catching what
And
you're
that-
referring to.
Oh. You began by the Spirit, now are you being perfected by the flesh, right? So what's left unstated at that point is beginning with the Spirit and finishing with the Spirit. So we're sort of, if you will, left hanging. Okay, Paul, how was this supposed to go then? And that's what I mean by the trajectory. What if the Galatians had never deviated in such a dangerous way from the path that they were on? Okay, anyone else, at least about what we've just looked at?
So, I'm sorry.
No, don't
I
apologize.
should look it up, but these verses from Romans, which you have in brackets.
Yes, that's
different words.
Yes, the ESV,
Okay.
I don't think, gets that precisely. These are actually the literal versions. It is newness of the Spirit, oldness of the letter.
What did they have? What did they
Do you have it open? Oldness of the written code, I think, or the old written code or something. And I actually looked up the ESV introduction, and they have a couple of paragraphs as to why they won't consistently translate the dual word group, in English, the slave word group. And part of the reason is because of association with antebellum South, which I think is understandable but wrong-headed. So they end up in some places using servant, other places using bondservant, but I think that's all nonsense. It's just like here, so that we serve. It's the same word in 5:10, serving as slaves, love slaves to one another. Serve as slaves. It's douluo, the verb. So I changed that. But I thought I put the other bracket is my exclamation point, because under the law, what the law did was it was at work on our members to bear fruit for death. Who would have thought that? This is so striking. And I think there, death probably means the curse of exile. In other words, this train, which was supposed to be bound for glory, went off the track right outside the station. And every time it got back on the track, it jumped the tracks again, right? It's very significant that while the covenant is being ratified and Moses is receiving the 10 words on the mountain, Israel is engaged in idolatry at the foot of the mountain. That's sort of like the whole story in a nutshell. Okay. All right. So here we are. But I say, walk by the Spirit. That is, so you're not biting and devouring one another. Walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For, apparently verse 17 supports verse 16 in some way, the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh, for these are opposed to each other. This is a tricky clause here, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now, the works of the flesh, and I think the word works there is probably picking up on 5, 6. It's certainly picking up on chapters 2 and 3, works of the law, right? So this is what the realm of the flesh produces. And it's evident to anyone who will stop and look. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. And I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Remember, the kingdom of God is something typically that we inherit. We're heirs of it, which describes its full manifestation at the appearance of Jesus. So those who are excluded from it certainly are the people that belong to the realm of the flesh, which produces just this kind of lifestyle or behavior or sinful decisions or things that involve irreligious behavior, division, strife, everything that's ugly. I'm listening, now I'm back to listening to books. So I read books and I listen to books. And I'm listening to a book called The Waking Giant, which is about America in the age of Andrew Jackson. Very good book. And he was touching on some of the utopian movements in the early part of the 19th century. If you look at 19th century American history, there were various efforts at kind of utopian societies. Some were religious, some were secular, some were a little bit shady on the sexual stuff, right? Free love, right? The 19th century wasn't always so buttoned up as we might think it was. But he refers to two. One is kind of proto-communist. Now, I'll use that little c. It was actually brought about by a very wealthy textile factory owner who felt a burden for workers who were exploited and oppressed. So he buys territory on a river in Indiana to create a commune called New Harmony, right? And there people are going to share in the means of production. They draw their wages in the form of what they take from the store. It's harmony, right? The whole idea, this is us living together in freedom and in justice, and it lasts 4 years. What happens? Infighting and dissension. 4 years it lasts. Then he refers to another one, Nabosh. I had the name, and then of course it left me. This one was in Tennessee. This one had a free love component. He doesn't talk as much about it, but it also lasts 3 or 4 years for the same reason. So the idealism that emerges from the culture, which I've always contended, at least since I've been here, is something of an image of God urge for justice and righteousness in these various attempts to actually segregate and create it. The apparent overwhelming tendency is failure, because this is the works of the flesh. This is the inevitable result. This is the fruit of how fallen people will conduct themselves. They'll bite and devour one another. Or who's got 5:26, if you wouldn't mind, Heidi, how this passage ends. Emily, sorry. Yeah.
Let us not be conceited, provoking the envying, or let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other.
Right. That's over and against living by the Spirit and being in step with the Spirit. Conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Look what Kara got. I didn't get one of those.
I know, it's really, it's handy, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I work as hard as Kara does.
Can Marcia Kendall your birthday?
Right, yes. But just those little, that's where, those little rents, those little tears in the fabric of the community. Hey, what's Debbie got? What kind of Bible's that? That seems like a lot of money to spend on a Bible, Debbie.
Don't answer. Oh,
You made me do it. Started out with an NIV, and then you go to New King.
Oh, so it's my fault.
Yes, it is. And I had to get ESV.
Right, okay. You get the idea. Very small, little, isolated provocations that begin to simmer inside and take on a life of their own until they produce resentment, jealousy, envy. Someone ends up, you put 30 men and women together, right? The TV networks have learned this. Isolate them, and eventually a few of them will pair off sexually and wreck the fabric of the community, right? Like Big Brother. I've not seen any of these, but that kind of, right, titillating show, it's predictable, right? People think, oh, Mr. Right, Mr. Wonderful, or Mrs. Right, Mrs. No, put 30 guys, 15 women, 15 men. You'll find Mr. Right and Mrs. Right, like in a week, because you operate according to the flesh. That's the realm in which you live if you do not have the Spirit. So because of the relationship between the law, the Sinai covenant, and the realm of the flesh, to come under it is to create the wreckage that the Galatian churches have become. All right.
So, in a community, if we happen to be in the proximity of some of this rotten fruit going on, be it ever so minor, what appears to be minor, do we have an obligation to speak up, admonish, some sort of obligation? What could be private, can't be let go.
Right. my experience, and I've got quite a bit now, right, suggests that it will be anonymous until it reaches boiling point. And then it will make itself known in a disastrous way. So when I look at Kara's pink hair and think, why did she get pink hair and I didn't? I'm going to keep it to myself. And I'm going to think about it while I'm driving. And I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night and wonder why I can't have pink hair, or why Debbie gets to spend so much on a Bible, or whatever. And then I'll start looking for the occasions to have that developing prejudice reinforced. See, I knew they were like this. This always happens, right? So all of this, maybe X number of weeks in, I say something to my wife about it, but we don't talk about it much. But I'm just sharing. And finally, it's like a boil, right? It's red, it's angry, it hurts, and then it busts. Now, had it been dealt with when Kara first got her pink hair, or Debbie tells me she actually didn't spend very much on the Bible at all, she got it used, but in great condition, yeah. But no, it's all going to go on in here. It doesn't manifest itself quickly because our churches aren't like their churches, right? These churches were not simply associations of Sunday worshipers, okay? There's probably not many of us here that see one another in any given week or in any given month. That was not the case for the Galatians or any of Paul's churches. So to take our idea of church, the building that we drive to and we assemble in for worship, all of which is ordained by God and approved by Him and called by Him, they had a life together as a people outside of that experience. So Dr. Brooks may see some people because many of his patients attend here. I may see some people if someone wants to talk to me. Ron and Jean now get together and see each other because they're digging a hole and repairing pipe. But we're not, it's not like going to school where you're in class together all the time, right? And where these works of the flesh tend to manifest themselves. So in that sense, it's easy to keep it inside. And we all know how to be polite and how to observe certain social decorums and norms so that we don't say anything that might be offensive, at least not intentionally. How are you doing today? Fine, right? So they couldn't have hid it. And it's aggravated now by the presence of the false teaching. And all of this will be produced. This is what God made war on, and His remedy for it was the eschatological spirit. So, what is walking by the Spirit? What does the phrase "to keep you from doing the things you want to do" actually mean? This gets a lot of ink because it's not entirely clear what this means. And what does the fruit of the Spirit, fruit singular, right, over and against works plural, what does it look like in a community? What does "against such things there is no law" mean? And finally, living by the Spirit and keeping in step with the Spirit. What do those things look like? Or is it just another way of saying walk by and being led by the Spirit? So I'll ask you, pick one. And I'm late this year, and I apologize, but my women's bathing suit directory will be available this Sunday, where I tell you how you should dress for the beach. Thomas Hendricks told me that, and I love that story. I think it was a sermon.
That was an annual event.
An annual event where the minister gave the rules for the beach. We
There were annual events year-round. Cars, cards, and Christmas
Yeah.
every December.
But that's the outworking of a way of thinking about religion that Paul wouldn't recognize. And yet there it is in a fairly prominent Christian church, which has the other form of legalism, which is keep the rules and you'll be sanctified. You can see just from this passage that that's so alien to Paul. So I asked you some questions. What do you think?
Can you ask in a different way? Because I don't understand what is your question.
Okay, yes.
What is
One question is, what exactly does walk by the Spirit, led by the Spirit, live by the Spirit, and keeping in step with the Spirit look like in real life? Okay, I think these are pretty much the same thing. So what does that look like? Do we passively wait for the Spirit to speak to us and give us instructions? For instance, would be a way of illustrating it. Do we somehow yield ourselves in a mystical sense to be sort of carried by the Spirit? What does it actually translate into for the people in this room if we're going to start doing this tomorrow? The second one is, what does the phrase "to keep you from doing the things you want to do" at the end of verse 17 actually mean? That gets a ton of attention, and I think the Reformed faith has largely misunderstood that passage. Third, what was third? Was there a third?
Yeah, it's like works of the flesh versus fruit.
Yeah, what would a community, right, look like where the fruit of the Spirit was being produced? And just as I gave you two appendices, and one of them is just three, I think, very edifying passages from Gordon Fee's book, including on page 4, the concern from beginning to end is with the Christian life in community. There is not a hint that Paul is here dealing with the tension between flesh and spirit. From beginning throughout has to do with spirit life within the believing community. The individual is not thereby brushed aside, but that is where the individual believer fits into the argument. Within the context of the church, each one is to live out his or her freedom by becoming love slaves to one another. So everything that's positive here is to be manifested within the group, not in the individual, isolated lives of Christians per se. What characterizes the group? What do you think of when you think of this group? Okay, so that would be the third question.
Jesus.
What about him?
Oh, that's usually a good answer.
Yeah.
Covers everything.
What's the
But
answer is Old
I
Testament.
think the love slave par excellence is our Lord. And so for us, to walk in the Spirit is to mimic Him in every situation, whenever we're involved. What Jesus did.
I know, and that's it's tempting to reduce it to that, though in the popular use of that, it's about making kind of moral decisions as an individual. I don't think that's what Paul has in mind, but the Jesus who loved me and gave himself for me is certainly a standard that we, as spirit people, can derive our way of living from. It's not some kind of one-off thing that is isolated in history as the way of atoning for sins, though it is that, right? It's that new commandment that I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. So when Jesus says that, taking that along with the Spirit, there's a whole lifetime of meaning wrapped up into that phrase, which is why on page 3, the first appendix, I provided these other passages that aren't necessarily just like Galatians, but where Paul says things that people who depend on the law for God's moral will wouldn't say. Yet Paul thinks to say these things is to connect with Spirit-filled people and set them on the right course. For instance, therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. So if you take the Galatians idea that they were on a trajectory that was subverted by the Judaizers, and they went off the track and are in danger of ceasing to be a Christian church, this is another version of that. You receive Jesus Christ by faith. Now walk in him. Oh, and be rooted in him and built up in him and be established in your faith, which he develops in the rest of chapters 2 and 3. Right? But nowhere does he now slide in the Decalogue and say, so remember, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. That's inadequate for the demand of the age. It's sub-eschatological.
Well, I think first we were in the past a slave for the sin. We sin because it was inside us. And when we believe that Jesus died for us and he put the sin in the cross for us, now we have this new heart, and now everything that we couldn't do in the past, now we can do it because we have the Holy Spirit. So we can walk and do everything because now we can say no to the sin, because we can choose or we can love God. And when you are in the flesh, you cannot love God. You can do external or moral things, but you cannot be. The difference is your attitude in your heart, your motivations. Now you can have the good motivation that is love God and try to worship him and try to please him. So it's not something a moral thing, it's love for him and for the others.
Right, and I think that's what Paul is getting at when he says it's the fruit of the Spirit. This is exactly where we should end up if we're following the story carefully, right? Works of the law and works of the flesh are things that we attempt to conform ourselves to. The fruit of the Spirit is the end product of being in the realm of the Spirit. In other words, he's the author of the fruit. Right?
Yeah, the church just doesn't have the confidence in the Spirit. Don't have what they should.
But there, but it requires we walk in the Spirit, we're led by the Spirit, live by the Spirit, and keep in step with the Spirit. And that's what I'm asking, what does that actually look like? And I think, in part, it very much looks like this awareness of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me, and now lives out life within me, within us, as the rule that provides the church with the kind of peace it desires. My peace I give to you, my peace I leave you. Actually, I think it's the other way around, right? Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts as a community. So, in Philippians, for instance, love this passage. I've actually preached this passage at a few weddings. Philippians 2. First, I read Philippians 2. Marcia got nervous the last time I did this, and she was there. Because I read the part of Philippians that begins in verse 5, and I say, and tonight we're going to talk about the issue of kenosis and Arianism versus what took place at the Nicene Creed, at the Nicene Council, and so I make it sound all academic and wonky, right? But when you pull the camera back and realize from 2:1 through 2:14 in Philippians, the reason Paul even brings this up, this insight into the incarnation, is because the people aren't unified. And so in order to be unified, he doesn't give them the Decalogue and double down on it. He says you need to start thinking like Jesus thought. And here's how Jesus thought. Though he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to hold on to for his own advantage, but he gave himself up. Not only did he become a man, he became a slave. And not only did he become a slave, he died. And not only did he died on a cross. So we look at the incarnation and try to explain born of a virgin, pre-existence, and Paul says, yeah, that's all very important, but I want you to look at it and reframe your thinking so you think like Jesus thought. I would say that's part of walking in the Spirit. But it requires a kind of training. Here's where the effort would be: to apply yourself by challenging your own thinking and have it renewed, which, coincidentally, brings us to Romans 12. How often Paul does this. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercy of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. It's not the worship service, it's a way of life. It's a sacrificial way of life. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And people love that. Oh, the renewal of your mind. I think someone's got a radio show or something, renewing the mind. But what is renewing the mind? It means engaging your mind so that it is in keeping with the value system of the age to come. It's a spiritual work of open imitation of Christ, and here's how it manifests itself. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think. Sounds like what Emily read to us in Galatians 5. This is part of a change in thinking. If you think of yourself too highly, you're off on the wrong foot, because Jesus didn't consider equality with God something to be held on to for his own advantage. So don't do that, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For here we go, right here in the community. This is where the renewing of the mind is manifest. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. Send me out there to look at the pipe, Ron, and I'll say, that's a pipe, all right. I've seen them on TV. I wouldn't know where to begin to repair it. Now, I'm not saying that's the only gift that's resident in the church, but it illustrates that everyone in this room has been gifted by the Spirit to contribute to the welfare of all of us together. And that's exactly what Paul does in Romans 12. That's the renewing of your mind. So, we, though many, are one body in Christ and individually members one of another. It's all about the relationships. It's all the horizontal. Ephesians is the same thing. Once you get past Ephesians 4:7, it's all about the unity of the church, the gifts that God's given to the church to bring about its unity, in order to bring about its stability, in order to protect it from false doctrine. Everywhere you look in Paul, it's about the horizontal. And so I think a major component of walking in the Spirit, living by the Spirit, being led by the Spirit, is an awareness of exactly how deep and profound the death of the second person of the Trinity incarnate is for His people. And roll that around in your head over and over and over again until it's coming out your pores, right? Until you stop and go, did I just say that again? What a dumb thing that was to say. I bet that hurt feelings. I'm not going to do that anymore. This is exactly what I was thinking about, and now I'm just out of habit. I'm retraining my mind as if I live in a new country with a different value system, with different rules, with a different culture. And then together we live this way right in the midst of the old creation. So when we talked about the Spirit and the present evil age and the new creation, there is a body of people who live visibly in the world, and they exist for a time in two worlds simultaneously, so that those who remain in this world in its fallenness will see something only in a community that they've never seen anywhere else. And that is, or at least by design, it's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Right? Now, unlike Romans 12, George doesn't get the peace, Harrison doesn't get the patience, Lisa doesn't get the kind. It's not the gifts distributed that way. This is characteristic of all of us together. And it is a profound confrontation with a world that, just like those New Harmony communities, or the Oneida community, or all sorts of utopian communities, think we want that. But as soon as they set it up, it collapses, because they're in the flesh. They're in the realm of the flesh, and all that realm produces is sexual impurity, and all the rest. So that's how I would look at walking in the Spirit. It's set your minds on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Therefore, put to death your members upon the earth, that kind of thing. In chapter 6, Paul's going to talk about fulfilling the law of Christ, which is almost certainly a phrase that he himself coined over and against people like the Galatians who were committed to the law of Moses and think that's the way forward. Paul says, actually, the way forward is the law of Christ. And I would say the law of Christ is probably Christ himself, especially in his incarnation and his death for sinners.
Geoff?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Trish. I just very quickly, I'd like to comment that from my perspective, many of these sins that we've analyzed here, strife, jealousy, rivalries, idolatry, you could break them into passive and active some no one in the church would ever know or see. No one would ever see jealousy or see enviness or even sexual immorality. But Paul makes it very clear that these are things that you only know that God knows, and maybe other people would know if they knew that you were being involved in sexual moral. And my point that I'd like to share, at least from studying this, as you say, is that I agree totally that changing our mind is also a matter of the fact that God gave us not only a heart and a soul, but He gave us a mind that we can use our own, whatever you want to call it, self-awareness, intelligence. I think walking in the Spirit is also being obedient. There are times that I may not feel like loving my wife, but not that I'm sure that sometimes she doesn't feel like loving me.
Shh, she's here.
Oh, that's right. Well, there are times that love is not a nice, lovey-dovey feeling. It's an action, and sometimes loving God is not a lovey-dovey feeling. It's an action of pure obedience. You choose not to do idolatry, or you choose not to be impure, or you choose not to do things that you might want to do, as it says, that keeps you from doing the things that you want to do, but you choose not to do them with your mind as well, just because you believe and you've got that awareness to love the Lord.
Yeah, I think, and because this is the fruit of the Spirit, right? It's the Spirit who's going to produce the fruit. So our part is the renewing of the mind. And Marcia brought this up last week. The sanctifying work of the Spirit, which inevitably is accompanied by suffering, is part of fruit production, right? Those branches connected to the vine, if they're going to bear fruit, they need to be pruned. Right? This is the Spirit's work. And we tend to shrink that work. And if you look at the church now and in history, it almost always means suppressing vice, not doing bad things, and getting better at not doing bad things. I used to joke about the Society for the Suppression of Vice as the Christian motto. There was such a thing in New York City in the late 19th century. Anyone ever hear of Alfred Comstock? And of course, it's all about sexual sin, pornography, prostitution, all the typical Christian targets. But Paul's thinking eschatologically here. He's not thinking stop doing bad things only. I want to see this in your group if you're really spiritual people. All sorts of people can stop doing bad things. Join Alcoholics Anonymous and maybe you can stop drinking. I mean that sincerely. You could remain unconverted and at least conquer your addiction or alcohol, to alcohol. Religious groups are devoted to keeping themselves from doing bad things. Paul says, I want to see fruit there. I want to see the things that manifest new creation. You're the orchard, you're the vineyard, whatever image you want to use. I expect to see love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Not just the kids singing it on Sunday morning in a little chorus. I want to see people doing this because that is the work of the eschatological Spirit. We were born again for this reason. When I read that passage in Peter, when I was in Scotland, all by myself, of course, because it's kind of ironic, but Peter, I couldn't believe it. I had to look at it. I'll read it. I didn't want to add it because we're looking at Paul, not Peter. Let's see. Yeah, in verse 22 of chapter 1, having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth, with this in mind, for a sincere brotherly love. In other words, the purification of the souls that occurred because of your obedience to the truth was to the end of a sincere brotherly love. Having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth, for a sincere brotherly love, love one another earnestly from a pure heart, since you have been born again. Right there. This is the goal of bringing you to life, that you would have brotherly love. So, based on that work, love one another earnestly. Is that something? And I think that's what Paul is saying here. And, the idea against which there is no law, it's a very funny thing to say. It may reflect what the Galatians have been putting themselves through with regard to the Torah, or it may just be, look, there's nobody who doesn't admire this. Jews and Gentiles alike are drawn to people who are characterized by love, joy, peace, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If you're struggling in some way, are you going to present yourself to somebody who has shown the fruit of the Spirit, or to somebody who is scrupulous about their law-keeping? Who's the one that you want to have share your burden? Because this is what's coming up in chapter 6. This is what a community of love, joy, peace, right, and the rest looks like. We'll see that in chapter 6. Who would you pick? Somebody who suffered and therefore has that almost intangible quality that we would associate with patience, kindness, and goodness? Or would you pick somebody who's scrupulous about suppressing vice in their lives?
Kindness, patience.
The first one, right?
Yes.
Me too. Me too. I think that's why Christian psychology has grown so enormous. I have nothing against it, but many psychologists are professionally patient, kind, and good, and gentle. And those are the people we want to share our burdens with. We might have done that before Freud in a community where people were characterized by this, who would take us under their wing, who would remind us that they went through something like this themselves, who were non-judgmental, who seemed to glow with, come and speak with me. Let me share your burden for a moment. Not the people who will lecture us. So you come in from the outside and see this, and you go, wow, we tried this when we were on that river at New Harmony, and it didn't last. How do these people do it? We didn't answer all the questions, but we're at 8:05 or 8:03.
You preached on Romans 12 once, and that's what Paul says, the body, outdo one another. What a motivation.
I know it. As if you're going to compete.
Yeah, exactly. Outdo one another.
I'll never forget, I was interacting with John Murray's commentary on Romans, which is a great commentary in many respects. But as soon as he gets to the passage in Romans 12, the transformed by the renewal of your mind, by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Where do you think it's found? In the Decalogue for John Murray. I thought, that's not here. What he did was he went back to Romans 7, verse 12, where Paul, to qualm fears and concerns, says, nope, the law is spiritual, it is holy, it is good. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. The problem is us. And he takes that, and now that becomes the universal application. Whenever I want to impose the Decalogue, I just go back to 7:12. Not even realizing that 7:12 is there because Paul's teaching that the law has been abrogated because that covenant is over. This is a new covenant. We don't have a dual covenant. That's so important. We don't have a dual covenant. We're not under two at once. One ended, one began. This is the bringing to conclusion of the Abrahamic covenant. So get busy.
Anybody need their oil change? I can't help you.
Yeah.
See Geoff.
How do we respond as believers when within our own church somebody is found to have had fits of anger or jealousy or division, and somebody says, oh, well, that person's really not a believer, he must not be really living in the Spirit. How are we to respond?
Yes, bring that question next week.
Okay.
Because chapter 6 actually gives us applications of what this means.
Right. I will. Thank you.
And interestingly enough, it's when somebody's caught in a sin. You'd say, whoa, boy, someone's been caught in a sin, that's a scandal. Well, maybe it's not so easy. Maybe there's a way to deal with it in keeping with the fruit of the Spirit that can bring about the person's recovery and restoration.
Well, for none that I've talked about the responsibilities that we have as believers, but if an outsider who's not a believer sees, oh, look at, it's hard to articulate what I'm trying to ask or say. It's if somebody who's not a believer were to believe that let's say that somebody saw one of us from church at the airport and had a fit, and they recognized him and he was a member of Parkwood's church. That's my sort of, does that person have not the right, how can I say, to say, boy, that person from Parkwood's church is really not a real Christian. He's a hypocrite, and that's why I don't go to church, because there are people like that person that I saw at the church and then at the airport doing ABC. And if he had that conversation with another believer at Parkwoods, it'd be like, no, it's a sin, and believers can sin. Anyway, it's maybe more complex to discuss at another time, but I've always struggled with that, in which we're all, who can possibly say that he's never done any of one of these, or two of these, or four of these? And it's for another time. But thank you.
You're welcome. Well, we're officially done.
That's our cue to go.
Very good.
Thanks, Geoff.